Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. So my discussion this afternoon would be on the history and epidemiology of HIV. Let me just it's done. All right. So I'd like to share with you the objectives for this module, which is that at the end of this session, the participant should be able to first describe the characteristic of HIV and how it is transmitted, identify really specific events in the history of HIV and how these events have changed the way we view and manage the disease today. And three, we'd like to describe the epidemiologic picture globally as well as here in the Philippines. Okay? So, just a short description of what is the human immunodeficiency virus. So, HIV is part of what we call the retrovirus family. So, it's a type of virus that has RNA or ribonucleic acid sa kanyang core. No? So, pag nakikita niyo po itong illustration, yung nasa core or nucleus ng isang HIV would be two strands of RNA. So what's important here to know is that meron siyang mga receptors na nakausli sa labas ng kanyang cell wall. Ito yung ginagamit niya para sa mga host cells, no? What's also important is it also has several enzymes, itong mga integrase, protease, saka reverse transcriptase na ginagamit niya to basically hijack yung mga immune cells sa katawan ng isang person with HIV, no? At ito ring mga enzymes na to ang tinatarget ng ating mga antiretroviral drugs, no? So far, two types of HIV have been identified. So we have HIV-1, ito yung mas virulent at effect ng HIV, and it's found in cases here in the Philippines, in Asia, and also in the West, no? Yung HIV-2 naman po is found mostly in patients in the African continent. So just a quick illustration lang, no, of the cycle of HIV. No? So basically, ito yung makikita natin na sinasabi nga nila that the virus that causes AIDS basically hijacks the cells, the host cells, especially itong mga CD4 cells. Ito yung type of what we call your T lymphocyte cells, which are very important for our immune system. So as you can see, itong isang virus ng HIV would attach itself to the CD4 cell. Tapos ilalabas niya, ipapasok niya ngayon yung kanyang RNA, i-integrate niya sa host DNA. So makikita mo, dumidikit siya doon. Mag-i-integrate siya. And then eventually, using the mechanisms of the host genome, magre-replicate siya. So magpuproduce siya ng mga proteins na kakailanganin ng human immunodeficiency virus. So eventually, kikita nyo mga dadami yung mga HIV loob na isang CD4 at usually isa-isa or sabay-sabay silang lalabas or magbabad out. Oops, sorry. So you can imagine pag punong-puno to at talagang nag-mature na lahat ng HIV, puputok sasabog itong CD4, no? So usually ito yung reason kung bakit in patients with HIV bumababa ang CD4 count, no? So pag lumabas na ang HIV from one mature HIV from one CD4 cell, it now has the opportunity to infect other cells in the body. Right? So ang mga mode of transmission would be through unprotected sexual intercourse. It can be heterosexual, through men having sex with men, and to a lesser extent through oral sex. No? Meron ding transmission via blood and blood products, especially transfusion and IV drug use. Ito pong transfusion, hindi na masyado nangyayari or virtually zero kasi maganda na po ang screening procedures natin for blood donation. Meron din po tayong mother-to-child transmission and also occupational transmission, yung mga accidental needle stick injuries halimbawa sa mga health facilities. Right? So looking at the different risks, no, that in terms of transmitting HIV, makikita po natin na historically talagang yung blood transfusion ang pinakamataas ang risk kasi syempre diretso na lumilipat ang dugo ng infected patient to another one, no? Pero as I've said, hindi na po ito nangyayari dito sa Philippines, no? The next riskiest act would be unprotected anal intercourse, no? Specifically, tinatawag natin na receptive anal intercourse. And you have other risks like needle sharing, needle stick injuries, and penile vaginal intercourse. So makikita po natin dito, actually, yung oral intercourse, oral sex carries a low risk. And then yung mga iba, yung biting, sharing of sex toys, spitting, throwing of body fluids has negligible risk for HIV transmission. Okay, just like to share with you a quick history of HIV. So more than 30 years na ang HIV circulating in the world, no? Pero may mga theories na sinasabi na even before 1981, may ang HIV na nagso-circulate, no? May mga theories na sinasabi na galing po ito sa mga monkeys in Africa and somehow nag-jump into humans. Siguro because some people in Africa in the 30s or 50s were eating meat from infected primates, no? Pero the modern history of HIV and AIDS came about, it started in 1981, wherein nung time na yon, no, the US Centers for Disease Control came up with reports, no, that they found some cases of previously healthy homosexual men in the United States, no, particularly sa West and East Coast, that suddenly developed autoimmune diseases or infections that were previously rare, no? So for example, there were homosexual men that developed a previously rare form of pneumonia called pneumocystis pneumonia, and then some also developed a previously rare form of skin cancer called Kaposi's sarcoma, no? But it was only around 1982 when the term AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, was first used, no? And by 1984, scientists in the United States and in France discovered the virus that causes AIDS, no? So nung umpisa, they called it HTLV and LAV, no? But eventually, both parties agreed and tinawag siyang HIV. At the same time, around November or December ng 1984, we recorded the first case of HIV here in the Philippines, no? Pero by 1985, yung commercial HIV test na ELISA was approved, and 1987, the first drug, HIV drug, was approved. So this is zidovudine or AZT. So we had 1988 was the first World AIDS Day. 1991, si Magic Johnson, yung basketball player, announces that he's HIV positive. So this is significant kasi he was one of the first heterosexual celebrities that came out with his condition. So it was the start of that, medyo nababawasan yung stigma that time na sinasabi that HIV was primarily as a disease of gay men, no? And one landmark event was in 1995 when the US Food and Drug Authority approved yung highly active antiretroviral therapy. So dito na nagsimula yung combination drug therapy for HIV. So this proved to be very effective through the years kasi talagang once this was used, no, talaga bumaba ang mga cases of morbidities and mortalities of people living with HIV, no, in the West and beyond. So by 1997, Combivir, which was the first combination drug na 2-in-1, it was approved. So it also helped in making patients more compliant and adherent to their drug therapy kasi mas kokonti na lang na pills ang kailangan nilang ikukunin, no? In 1998, here in the Philippines, the first AIDS law was passed. And then by 2001, generic antiretroviral drugs became available. Again, this is very significant kasi bumaba ang cost ng mga antiretrovirals. So it became more affordable to people in developing countries. So halimbawa dito sa Philippines, libre, no? In 2012, na-approve ang pre-exposure prophylaxis medications. And then by 2014, the UNAIDS launches its 1990 targets. 2015, naglabas ang WHO ng guidelines na sinasabi na once ang isang tao ay na-diagnose ng HIV, na being HIV positive, kailangan simulan na ang kanyang ARV therapy as soon as possible, regardless of his or her CD4 count. So, by 2017, we started the U is equal to U campaign. And by 2018, nagkaroon tayo ng bagong HIV law, RA 11166. Okay? So, looking at the prevalence of HIV globally, na makikita natin na sa Africa, pinakamataas ang percentage ng population na HIV positive, around 4.2%, no? If we compare that to our region, WHO region, yung Western Pacific, overall, yung region, including the Philippines, medyo mababa ang prevalence, 1% of the population having HIV. Okay? So, by the end of 2018, globally, there are around almost 38 million people living with HIV, with 1.7 million new infections and around 770,000 deaths related to HIV and AIDS. Right? So, pag titingnan natin ang trends, based on the latest UNAIDS report, overall, okay, the cases of new HIV infections globally, bumaba po siya ng mga 18%, no? Pero apparently, the Philippines has been bucking that trend. So in the same period between 2010 to 2019, tumaas tayo ng mga around 203% in terms of new HIV cases. So sinasabi nga ngayon, Philippines na ngayon ang number 1 when it comes to new HIV cases. So if you look at the general trends, no, globally, between 1990 and 2018, actually yon, bumababa na ang mga taong nagkakaroon ng new infections. And dito naman sa susunod na graph, no, we can see that nagkaroon ng pagtaas ng morbidities and mortalities due to HIV and AIDS. Pero starting mga 2004-2005, nag-umpisa nang bumaba. No? Primarily because dito na rin talaga nagkakaroon ng maximal use of yung mga heart na therapy. Pero, again, the Philippines, medyo iba yung trending sa atin. Ano? So, lumalabas na talagang tumataas po ang cases ng new HIV infections in our country. No? So, actually, this current increasing trend started around the year 2008. No? So, yun nga, sinasabi na posibleng this is because of mas maraming natitest, pero at the same time, this is also because of a lot of people really doing risky behaviors. So, in terms of the epidemiology of HIV in our country, yun na nga, mababa pa rin overall ang prevalence because there's only less than 0.1% of the population of the country who is infected with HIV. But in terms of absolute numbers, as reported by the latest DOH figures from the Epidemiology Bureau, sabi nila that there are almost 70,000 reported HIV cases as of July this year. And we have 1,111 new cases. So that will average to around 35 new cases being diagnosed every day. No? So, ang geographical distribution, pinakamarami pa rin, around 1/3 of the cases come from the National Capital Region, followed by Region 4A, and then Region 3, and then number 4 is Region 7, yung Central Visayas. Right? In terms of mode of transmission, ang pinakamarami pa rin cases come from male-to-male sex, and then next would be men having sex with both men and women, and then here we have cases coming from heterosexual sex, no? And there are a small proportion coming from people who are using drugs and sharing infected needles, right? So sa table na to, show you yung mga developments ng iba-ibang modes of transmission saka yung changes, no? So sabi ko nga, for example, nung nagsimula yung HIV/AIDS epidemic in the early 80s, may mga cases na talaga nakakakuha ng HIV dahil sa tainted blood. Pero since then, talagang nag-improve na ang mga testing at screening for blood. So ngayon, virtually zero na talaga ang cases natin. No? So we have cases from sharing of infected needles. Pero ito rin, in the past siguro decade or so, wala tayong recorded cases of people getting HIV from needle stick injuries, occupational. And also from this table, I'd also like to share na yung data showing that from this time, talagang ang pinakamataas na number of new cases would come from the 25 to 34-year-old age group. So this is concerning for us kasi if you look at it, itong age group na to, ito yung productive age range, di ba? So ito yung mga working age. And so many people here at this age range are the breadwinners of their families. So may economic impact din po ito. And then the next would be na tumataas din ang incidence would be from people who are at the 15 to 24-year-old age group. Right? So graphically, from the latest DOH HARP report, ito yung lumalabas na trend din. So from 1984 to 2019, talagang mataas talaga ang trend ng mga proportion of new cases from the 25 to 34-year-old age group. Although ayun na rin, tumataas din ang mga cases from 15 to 24 years old. And then you have also yung mga 35 to 49 years old. And then, pero ang alarming din, meron din tayong nakukuha mga cases from patients 15 years old and below. Right? So basically, ito yung latest figures for the Philippines. And so just to summarize, HIV is a retrovirus that is capable of establishing a persistent chronic infection in humans. So ang pinakamataas na risk of transmission is with blood transfusion. Pero nga sa Philippines, ang pinaka-common transmission is through receptive anal intercourse. So the global epidemic began in the early 80s and it spread to many countries. But now, as of 2018, bumaba talaga ang rate by 18%. And this is also because of the introduction of HART and in the mid-1990s, and this has drastically reduced morbidity and mortality rates in the West. So while ang overall prevalence ng HIV sa Philippines is still considered low, our country is now the number 1 in terms of rate of new cases. And so talagang fastest growing tayo in the world. So with that, I'd like to thank you. And if you have any questions, just feel free to ask or write your questions in the chat box. So maraming salamat po.